today on 670 Score, David Haugh was talking about how Ryan Poles, you would not be able to tell he was an offensive lineman in college based off his drafts, and that he has no outlining trait that he drafts with. So we're going to play this here, and then I'll respond with some stuff I researched earlier.
Well, I look at day 2 and day 3, and even you could lump day 1 in there if you want. I would never know. Nobody would ever know if you didn't read it in his bio that the Bears general manager played offensive tackle in college. You would never know that this was the work of a former offensive lineman. Because stereotypically, you would think that former offensive linemen, guys who went to college on scholarship for their ability to block and spend 4 years in the trenches, would want to build their football team from the ball on out. And that is certainly not what this general manager has done. This is his 4th draft. By the end of the show, I hope that somebody can define for me what his traits are as a drafter.
All right, let's go through those drafts. So in 2022, there was 11 picks, 5 were linemen. In 2023, 10 picks, 4 were linemen. In 2024, 5 picks, 2 were linemen. And in 2025, 8 picks, 3 were linemen. So in 2022, 45% of the picks were linemen. 2023, 40%. 2024, 40%. 2025, 37.5%. So if we're going to look at all 34 of those picks, that's 14 linemen. That's 41% of the time. Now, if we want to include picks that were used in trades to acquire linemen. Now, I included obviously picks that were used on non-lineman positions to get the correct percentage. So out of that, that's 42 picks and picks plus the trades in there. And divided by that, that's 19 linemen. So 45% of picks used in the draft and trades made that weren't like pick swaps, but they were for players, 45% of that has been spent on linemen. So the idea that the investment is not there is just not true whatsoever. And if you want to look at traits, Poles very obviously values very athletic players because the reality is there's a lot of good football players at the college level. Not a lot of them have the athleticism to succeed at the NFL level. So if we want to kind of look at the argument of he has not invested in the offensive line, that is just so false and just such a old narrative, lazy narrative. And if you spent the time to just kind of research this in 10 minutes, you know that that's not the case. I mean, guys, he's almost spending in 2022 in his draft, he almost spent 50% of the picks, which is the most amount of picks he's had in a draft on linemen. So if you want to look at the trades, they traded a 6 for Dan Feeney. They traded for Montez Sweat. They traded for Ryan Bates. You traded for Jonah Jackson. You traded for Joe Thuney. 2 of those were this year alone. I think, in my opinion, you can make the argument that he has not used the capital well. But the idea that he hasn't spent capital on the offensive line, or the line in general, because I'm including defensive linemen here. I'm talking trenches specifically. That's just not true. So of those 42 picks, right, 28.5% have been O-line, 16.6% have been D-line.
As somebody who is as an architect of a football team, what blueprint is he working off of? Is it build from the ball on out, focus on the trenches, or is it go for skill and worry about the rest later? Or is it whatever I feel like on any given day and any given pick is the direction I'm going to go because I operate by letting the board talk to me?
I don't know why he's joking about that. You always want to go best player available. And sometimes you're not in the position to do that. But for the most part, I feel like the Bears have, and we can talk a little bit more about their draft later in this video. But at the end of the day, like Luther Burden at 39, that's letting the board talk to you, and you're probably not getting a better player at that spot. And that's because other teams passed up on him because he's a wide receiver. He didn't have the production last year. But when you look at where the Bears are as a team, I think taking swings on talent like that when they're sitting there at the draft, even though you may need a left tackle. I think that's what keeps the team. We've seen what Detroit has built. They take the best player available. So I don't really understand what he's talking about letting the board talk to him. The board was telling you that Colston Loveland was probably the most valuable player you could have took at 10 based on the discussions about how there was people trying to move up in the draft. And then as soon as the Bears took Loveland, the calls kind of quieted down. And that is Denver was one of the teams, I believe, trying to get up for Loveland. And there was one other, I believe it was the Colts. So it's like, there's obviously value. And in my opinion, when a team like the Broncos want to trade up, I really respect Sean Payton. I think he's one of the best minds in football. That tells you that they made the right pick.
You know what the board's saying to you? Grasp the obvious.
The obvious was Luther Burden.
Look at your depth chart.
Let's look at the depth chart. So when we look at the depth chart, we have a loaded receiver room. We have a loaded tight end room. You have a very solid offensive line. Okay. Now the argument, if you want to make an argument about at 10 going an edge rusher, that's a different story. Defensive tackle, different story. Taking Walter Nolan, different story. But that's not what the argument is. The obvious is take the best player available because you need good football players. The Bears have a lot of good football players, but they don't have great football players. They don't have a lot of great football players right now. And Colston Loveland could be that. Luther Burden could be that. They spent a lot of money on the defensive line. They have not, it's not like they haven't invested in these positions. The Bears depth chart is actually pretty good. And where I'd say you lack is tackle flexibility, especially with Braxton Jones being on the last year of his contract, coming off of an injury. So I don't know. I don't really agree with that.
You should have one. So the overall draft you're not upset about, but I do think it's very curious. The longer this went on Friday and Saturday, the more curious it became. So the best pick, I think when we look back in 5 years, the best pick is going to be Luther Burden III because I do think he's the most dangerous. The biggest reach, I was surprised that they took Ozzy Trapilo from Boston College. When they need a left tackle, they drafted a guy who with better experience at right tackle. And he's big, and everyone says the same thing. He's tall, and he needs to work on getting lower. But if he's not ready to play this season, then that will be a reach. And if he isn't ready to play this season, why did you take him in the second round?
Okay, so there's so much wrong in what he just said. The biggest reach is definitely Ruben Hippolyte, the second in the fourth round. Some people had a draftable grade on him. Some people did not. Obviously, this is what we were talking about before, the athletic scores, the relative athletic scores. He tested very well. He's a very athletic player. That's the biggest reach by far. They could have added more talent. And that is the one draft pick I will argue with people on, or argue with polls on, is that was not the right pick in my opinion. And I don't know what they have planned for him. I'm just kind of trusting the process at this point, but I don't believe in that pick. And that is by far the biggest reach. Let's talk about Ozzy Trapilo because they're talking about he took a right tackle when they needed a left tackle. Okay, so here's the reality. Kieran Amagaji got thrown out there last year, and he was horrible. Just absolutely horrible. He shouldn't have been out there. He got Caleb killed. Okay. The reality is he was probably a year away from being a year away last year. So he shouldn't even touch the field this year, in my opinion. Kieran Amagaji. Okay. Between pick 39 and when the Bears pick next at 56, there was only 2 tackles taken. Okay. 2 tackles taken. And that was Ariante Ursary to the Texans and Anthony Belton to the Packers. Okay. So if we want to go back to that depth chart here, as you can see at right tackle, we have Ozzy Trapilo, Darnell Wright. This isn't all correct. Just keep in mind that we're just looking at who are the available tackles on our depth chart. Braxton Jones, Kieran Amagaji, Darnell Wright, Ozzy Trapilo. Okay. Does anybody who is a Bears fan want to watch Kieran Amagaji play next year if Braxton Jones or Darnell Wright goes down? Because I, for one, do not. Okay? And Kieran is a left tackle. He's not a right tackle. So he's talking about you drafted a right tackle when you needed a left tackle. No, you needed a swing tackle because this is the guy that's going to be your backup. Okay? Ozzy Trapilo. 70% of his snaps at college were at right tackle. 30% was at left tackle. Okay? Not great if you wanted to fill in a left tackle, but he has experience there. Let's look at the tackles that were taken before him at between 39 and 56. Ariante Ursary and Anthony Belton. Ariante Ursary, higher than Ozzy Trapilo on the consensus board, but just to know, Ozzy Trapilo was higher than Anthony Belton on the consensus board. And I'm not saying consensus board means a lot, but I'm just, they should all be there is what I'm saying. Ursary took 99.7% of his career snaps at left tackle. Belton took 99.5% of his career snaps at left tackle in college. So let me get this straight. If Darnell Wright on the right side were to go down, you are going to play Kieran Amagaji, who looked unplayable last year and has only really career experience at the left tackle position. Now, I don't understand how that makes any sense. Ozzy Trapilo was labeled as one of the most pro-ready tackles in the class by Brandon Thorne, who is one of the more respected O-line evaluators in the industry. Ozzy Trapilo can play both sides, and they need a swing tackle this year. They're not looking, obviously, you'd love Trapilo as a second-round pick to be your starter, to be able to come in and start, which I believe he can do. But to say that, well, you needed a left tackle. No, you need a swing tackle right now because Kieran isn't ready to be on the field. So I think the biggest thing for me with this video is there's just so much that's just not true about this situation in what he's talking about. And if you want to make the argument that Poles has not done a great job creating the best offensive line, defensive line, line depth, I understand that. To say he hasn't invested and to say Ozzy Trapilo was a reach and to say you needed a left tackle, he's not wrong. The Bears do need like a left tackle for the future because they're not going to play Braxton Jones. But in terms of what they needed for this year, I think Trapilo is the right option. And also, if Trapilo and Kieran both suck and Braxton is gone, guess what your first round pick is next year? A left tackle. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you think Ozzy Trapilo was the right pick. Leave a like, subscribe. We'll be back daily.